Alireza Firouzja and Tani Adewumi face off in this titled Tuesday clash. Now, on this channel, we've covered both players quite a bit. Alireza quite a lot more, but there are many games of Tani Adewumi's on this channel, and some are my most watched videos. And I've never seen them play each other. I will say this: obviously, they're not at the same level. Firouzja is top 10 in the world. Tani Adewumi is a very strong player, a FIDE master. He has not yet attained the IM or GM title, although I believe he certainly will. He's still quite young. But he's a very strong online blitz player, and he's been over 2,800 on online blitz. And the ratings that you see next to their names are their chess.com ratings. And this is a very compelling game with a shock ending. You've been warned. Let us begin. Firouzja has white. He begins with e4. Tani plays c6. The Caro-Kann defense, knight c3, d5. Basically, the idea of the Caro-Kann is to place a strong point on d5, but allow this bishop at c8 to develop freely. Firouzja plays queen to f3. More normal is knight to f3 or d4. Queen to f3 is something of a sideline, and he does threaten actually capture and win the d5 pawn right out of the gate. So Tani goes ahead and takes on e4. Knight takes e4, knight to f6. Bishop to c4. It's a mistake, obviously, to take on e4 because bishop f7 is losing. So he backs up his knight with knight b to d7. And now if Firouzja plays the tempting move knight to g5, aiming at f7, then black can respond with this move, knight to e5, which defends f7, hits the queen and the bishop. So instead, Firouzja just plays d4, controlling the center, e6, and c3. Knight e4, queen e4. And here the main move is knight to f6, but Tani actually plays a novelty, at least in my database, and that is bishop to d6, preparing castling immediately. A knight to f3 is played by Alireza, castles, and bishop to g5. Developing a piece with tempo, attacking the queen. You definitely don't want to play f6 and weaken your structure. I mean, e6 would just fall. So instead of moving the queen, Tani goes ahead and plays knight to f6. He self-pins, but he feels like he can get out of that pin later. And of course, he's also attacking white's queen, which then moves to e2. Now h6, hitting the bishop. The bishop stays on the same diagonal. He wants to maintain that pin on the knight. And now Tani plays b5. This is a common theme in the Caro-Kann, not only gaining queenside space, but he wants to control these central light squares. And these pawns do that. Particularly d5 is an important square for black in the Caro-Kann. The bishop moves to d3, moving to this important diagonal where potential mate threats later in the game could emerge. And then bishop to b7 is played by Tani. This basic idea, he wants to play a6 to defend b5, and then play c5 and allow this bishop to attack down this diagonal. He wants both of these bishops just sort of cruising along these diagonals towards white's king side. Castles a6, continuing that plan. Rook f to e1 and c5, just as we mentioned. And Tani has some very nice bishops, aiming now at Firouzja's king on g1. Rook a to d1. And here he plays queen to e7, which turns out to be an inexact move. cd4 was probably better, a computer recommendation. After knight d4, rook to e8. The bishop can tuck back at f8. Maybe play e5 later. He would be in good shape. The problem with queen to e7 is illustrated by Alireza's next move, knight to e5. A very strong move, placing this knight here, and the knight cannot be captured. The problem is if he takes the knight, then after pawn takes, now this f6 knight is pinned and lost. The game would be over. So the strong knight gets to stand at e5 for the moment. So Tani makes a very committal decision, a very aggressive decision. He is an aggressive tactical player. He likes to attack. He plays the move g5. This does break the pin. That is true. It also gains space on the king side, where maybe they can work together with these two bishops to attack the king at g1. However, he does also weaken his own king. He's moving the pawns in front of his king, a double-edged decision. The bishop goes to g3. Now he takes on d4. White responds. And he now has that key d5 square that black likes to get in these structures. So he can be happy as far as that is concerned. Rook a to d8, putting some pressure on this isolated pawn. And here, h4 was played by Firouzja. And computers show this is not the most precise move. The computers recommend the move bishop to b1, with the idea of moving the queen to c2, maybe, or even d3, and setting up a battery where there's potential threats at h7. Um, h4 obviously is designed to attack this weakened kingside structure, but Tani Adewumi makes an exclamation point move and illustrates why this was not the most exact move for white to play. He plays king to g7. The idea is he is anticipating these pawns being exchanged and the h-file opening up. So by playing king to g7, his rooks can shift over to the h-file and prepare for attack. F4 is what computers recommend for white. Firouzja plays rook to f1, and computers evaluate this position as completely equal. Tani has played even with Firouzja up to this point. Firouzja's idea, obviously, is to play f4 and support that advance, but f4 could have been played immediately. Knight to d5, played by Tani, a strong move, not only placing the knight on a strong square, aiming at squares like f4, but also clearing the way for this f-pawn to advance, the possibility of f5, f4, shutting out the bishop at g3, gaining space against white's king, is becoming very real, and Alireza has some reason to be nervous here. Tani is playing very well. He goes ahead and takes on g5. Again, a move like queen to h5 might have been better in, keeping things even. But now, this h-file is open. And Tani has got what he wants in terms of the attack. And he's still threatening this idea of f5, f4. Rook to c1 was probably the best move for Alireza, according to the computers. The idea is the knight jumps into c6, and by forking the rook and the queen, basically forces off this powerful light-squared bishop. But instead, he plays the move f4. Again, challenging these pawns in front of black's king, but Tani makes the computer move recommendation here, f5, a very strong idea. And now, black has the advantage. Tani now has a clear advantage in this position, gaining space on the king side, and it's white's king that's actually in more danger than Tani's is. Rook d to e1, aiming down the e-file, aiming at the queen. g4, locking the structure, and now Tani can play rook to h8 and continue to put pressure on Firouzja's king at g1. Knight to g4, a strong move from Alireza. The idea is that if you take the knight, then queen takes g4 check, and when the king moves, rook takes e6, hitting the queen with all kinds of threats. White is totally lost in this position, so the knight cannot be captured, basically. And Tani just goes ahead with his plan, rook to h8, again aiming down the h-file. And now the knight retreats to h2. He plays rook d to e8. He could have just played queen to f6 right now, with the idea of moving the rook to g8 and the king to f7. That would have maybe a little bit more precise. Rook d to e8, queen to f2, and now queen to f6, which also puts some pressure on d4. It's defended at the moment, but just a little bit of extra pressure. Bishop to c2. What Firouzja wants to do is redirect this bishop to the b3 square, where it can put some pressure on this e6 pawn or the knight. And now Tani plays queen to h6, aiming down this h-file. And black just has a clear edge. With the threat of rook to g8 and king to f7, Alireza is in big trouble. Black is winning right now, but stay tuned. Bishop to b3, continuing his plan. And here Tani makes a move. Knight takes f4. Rook e to g8, as we mentioned, attacking down the g and h files, looks to have been more accurate. This move throws away some of black's advantage. Not all of the advantage, but quite a bit of it. The best response from Firouzja, as it turns out, would have been bishop takes knight. And then this idea from black, in a blitz game with not much time, this is obviously very hard for the players to see, but that queen to h2 check, giving up the queen at first, but then bishop h2 check, forcing the king to h1. Now bishop to g3 with a discovered attack from the rook at h8 and an attack on the queen at f2, king g1, bishop f2. And this position, it's an endgame where black is a little bit better. His pawns are healthier, his king is better placed, his bishop is on a stronger diagonal. So it still would be a bit better for Tani in that situation. But Firouzja does not play that. He plays rook to e3, and this gives the advantage back to Tani, a more significant advantage. And he plays the strong idea of queen to g5 with the threat of knight to h3 check. The idea is if knight to h3 in that position, gh3, rook takes h3, and basically this bishop is completely collapsing, as is Alireza's position. So he plays d5. This helps block the bishop. And now knight to h3 check. Tani has played very well so far in this game. Pawn takes. And here, if he had continued with rook to h3, he would have had a winning position. But instead, he plays the move f4, which makes sense. I mean, you're forking the rook and the bishop. You're also threatening to capture the bishop, which is pinned. So it is a natural move. But Alireza plays knight to g4. And this move contains a very nasty trap. What Tani should have played here is rook takes h3. He would have been in decent shape. It's just a crazy position, basically, at that point. But instead, he fell for the trap, and he took the bishop at g3. And some of my more eagle-eyed viewers will know why this was a mistake. Can you see the right move for white? That's right. Alireza plays queen to f7, checkmate. And the elite world top 10 player wins in the end. Either a tragedy or a miracle, depending on your perspective. I hope you enjoyed the game. See you again soon at Chess Dog. Goodbye.